Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the first webinar of the Efficiency for Access Design Challenge 2021 to 2022. We're excited to have you all here today, whether live or watching this recording later down the line. My name is Sean. I'm on the Efficiency for Access Design Challenge team, and I'll be hosting this webinar for today. Just a bit of housekeeping before we begin. I am recording this webinar and its transcript right now, which will be available online. If you don't wish to be recorded, please turn off your video and/or mute yourself. We will share the recording and slides with you following the event. Today we'll be hearing from 3 speakers. When they're presenting, please turn off your video and mute yourself to avoid any distractions. However, you are free to turn on both for our Q&A portion of the event. If you do have a question during the Q&A period, please use the hand raising function. I believe that should be on the bottom of your screen, and we'll call upon you. Additionally, the chat will be open to questions and comments from our audience throughout the event, and I encourage our speakers to participate in there as well. I would encourage you all to ask as many questions as you can muster, not only because we have a fantastic panel of speakers today with a wealth of expertise and experience, but because this year's webinars are organized around the different elements of the assessment criteria. So each webinar will focus on a different area you will be assessed on in the final submission and pitching session. So today's session pertains to social impacts right here. Specifically, the questions highlighted here found in your challenge briefs. Today is about considering your end user. So understanding what an end user is, how you can identify one, how to design with an end user in mind, and understanding your impact upon them. Just here is the agenda. So we only have about an hour for today's session, and we'll hear from 3 speakers, followed by a Q&A portion, and a few things to close up shop. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our speakers. Today we'll be hearing first from John Leary. Dr. John Leary is a senior researcher with Modern Energy Cooking Services Program, otherwise known as MECS. You may have noticed he has graciously stepped in to fill the shoes of Wendy Hado, who wasn't able to join us today. He is an electric cooking specialist based in Nairobi, Kenya. He has over 5 years of experience supporting everyday cooks across the global south to explore the array of modern energy efficient appliances currently in the market and co-create the next generation of on-grid and off-grid electric cooking devices. Then we'll be hearing from Kinya Kamati. Kinya is a project director and co-founder of Kijani Testing Limited in Kenya. Kinya is a renewable energy enthusiast with a specialty in solar irrigation systems in emerging EA markets with a passion for innovation and poverty alleviation. Finally, we'll hear from Ivy Langat. Ivy is a senior associate with 60 Decibels based in Nairobi. Since joining the team in 2018, she has worked on numerous projects within the energy, agriculture, financial inclusion, and gender sectors. Prior to 60 Decibels, Ivy interned at UN Habitat's Housing and Slum Upgrading Branch and was a local pathway fellow with UN SDSN Youth. She has also volunteered with various organizations in Kenya and Mozambique. Ivy holds a first-class degree in environmental and biosystems engineering from the University of Nairobi. So we have an exciting session planned for you today. Great way to kick off everything for this year. I'll stop rambling on now and pass you on to John Leary. John, would you like to take it away?
Thanks, John. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Fantastic. Well, yeah, thank you for the introduction and for the opportunity to come here and share some of our insights with you today. Yeah, unfortunately, Wendy is not here herself, but we worked very closely together on this project, which was to try and understand which is the best electric pressure cooker from the point of view of an everyday cook. Next slide, please. So this is part of an awards competition called the Global Leap Awards, which is a globally recognized brand which tries to find the best-in-class energy-efficient appliances. We had identified the electric pressure cooker as a highly energy-efficient appliance, which is very well matched to Kenyan cooking practices and with similar kind of results across the East Africa region. So we really wanted to drill down and decide which is the best electric pressure cooker. So before I dive into the details of the competition itself, I want to take a step back and just contextualize what is an end user. Well, the definition itself may seem very obvious, as in it's a person who actually uses a product or service. But what can be a bit misleading sometimes is that often the customer and the end user are different people. So the customer is the person who purchases a product or service, whereas the end user is the person who's actually using it. For example, in the context of buildings, then an architect may design a hotel company for a hotel for a hospitality company, but the end users are actually the guests who stay in the hotel. In the context of food, then parents may buy breakfast cereal for their children, but the end users are actually the children who eat the breakfast cereal. So in the context of cooking devices, which is what I'm going to talk about today, then cooking device manufacturers sell their products to wholesalers. So the wholesalers are the customers of the cooking device manufacturers, but they're not the end users. The wholesalers often sell to retailers, who are also not the end users. The retailers then sell to customers who might be the end users. So the customers may or may not be the cooks themselves. The ones who are doing the cooking, they are the real end users. In the context of cooking, then often it's male head of households who are in control of the household finances. Yet in many global south contexts, it's women who are the primary cooks. So that's an important distinction, which really governs the whole way in which you market and design a cooking device. Next slide, please. So what do we want to achieve with this testing program? Well, we'd already done a comprehensive laboratory testing program conducted in the US by a certified testing laboratory, which is really trying to make everything as repeatable as possible. What we wanted to do in the usability testing was to put the cook back into the equation and really understand what is important to everyday cooks and which models of EPC most embodied those important attributes. Next slide, please. So who tested these electric pressure cookers or EPCs? Well, we had two groups. We had users and we had super users. So the users were our typical target end user, so our everyday cook. These are the people that are likely to make up the majority of the customer base for this device going forward. When I say customer base, of course, thinking about this in terms of the context of the people that will be using these devices is in an everyday context. And then we have the super users. So the super users are the innovators or the early adopters. These are the people who are ahead of the curve and already have an electric pressure cooker, already understand the details of how it works and can really guide us into the specifics of which features are most important and the details of how they might work and be refined. So usability testing was conducted in Nairobi in Kenya, importantly during the time of COVID. So a lot of the research methods we used were adapted to minimize in-person interaction. Next slide, please. So these two groups of participants in the study, the super users, then these are people who are typically already cooking with electricity as their primary fuel, either that or gas, and stacking those two fuels together. Whereas the users were using more of a blend of different fuels, charcoal, kerosene, firewood, as well as LPG and electricity. Both of them had reliable electricity access, but slightly more so for the super users, slightly higher levels of education, slightly higher income bracket. In terms of household size, we wanted a mix of sizes of households between the two different groups. We also wanted to focus in on specifically on the main gender of cooks. So mainly women testing, but we're also recognizing the role of men, both as the decision makers, so people who may authorize the purchase of these new devices, so it's important to keep them happy too, but also importantly as end users themselves as well. So whilst with traditional cooking devices, then women are overwhelmingly the ones responsible for cooking. With new modern energy efficient devices, what we've seen is that often men are more interested in taking on responsibility in the cooking because cooking becomes easier. When you have to light a fire, collect wood, etc., it's a big hassle. So it's easy to leave it to the women to do. But when you just have to press a button and it can happen automatically, then many men become much more interested in supporting their wives in the kitchen, or bachelors cooking independently. So we did include some men in the testing as well. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go pretty quick from here. I focused on the elements of who we included in the testing. I'm just going to give a very quick overview of what we actually did and what we found out. So this was one of the few parts of the testing that was done in person. This is a focus group to understand, firstly, what is important in EPC. This is what we did right at the beginning. Next slide, please. After the initial focus group, each of the participants in the testing took home each model of electric pressure cooker that was entered into the competition. They did the super users did a set of what we call controlled cooking tests. This is where you pick one set recipe or a series of set recipes, and you cook the same dish on each appliance so you can get transferable results for how much energy, how much time is used to cook that dish, and also ratings on the cooking experience and the quality of the food. Next slide, please. We also use mobile ethnography. So very simply, this is using your mobile phone to share experiences around what worked and what didn't work quite so well about cooking as part of your everyday routine using these different devices. We also deployed a series of surveys via the mobile phone so we could get quantitative metrics on how each of these models performed according to the attributes that we defined based upon the findings of that first focus group we did together. So they're the factors that are important to everyday cooks. Next slide, please. Then we had a final focus group to tie it all up together, and that one was virtual. So we focused on this one on willingness to pay. So we are now, every participant in the study had now spent at least 3 days testing each model of electric pressure cooker. So they were experienced with what each model could do and what they couldn't do. And we really wanted to understand how much was each of these devices worth, and how does that stack up to what they're actually selling for. Next slide, please. So the findings, what was most important to users? We had a list of around 10 attributes, but the top 3 were safety, size, and service delivery. So how well does it actually cook? Frying, boiling, and additional functionality as well. Next slide, please. And then to summarize, which electric pressure cookers do users really want? Well, we tested, I think it was around 10 models, and we had 3 that really stood out as being head and shoulders above the rest. Next slide, please. The first is the Instant Pot. So this is like the Ferrari of electric pressure cookers. This one ticks all the boxes. It does everything that everyone wants, but the price is very high. So it's out of reach for most people, unfortunately. Next slide, please. Then we have the Burn electric pressure cooker. This is like the Toyota. It is much more affordable. It's much more rugged. It's adapted for local conditions. It's specifically designed for the East African market. So it's affordable, and it still ticks most of the boxes. So this is a very popular EPC, this one. It won the best value prize. Next slide, please. And then the third one that stood out was the Von. This is like the Mercedes. So it's still, again, it scores well in all attributes. The price is moderate, so it's within reach for some people, but still it's aspirational. It's out of reach for many, especially the lower and middle income households. Next slide, please. So if you'd like to find out more, then please do check out the Global Leap Awards website. You can just Google Global Leap Awards and electric pressure cooker, or there's a URL down there. I will put into the chat some other resources. There are in particular some impact stories which the class team put together, which do a fantastic job of giving you a window into the kitchens of some of our cooks that participated in the study, such as Agnes right here. So that concludes my presentation for today. And yeah, over to the next speaker. Thank you, Sean.
Thanks, John. Provided a great groundwork for everyone. And I'll be sharing these slides as well at the end of this presentation. So you'll have access to those links as well. And I'll share the links that John shares in the chat right now as well. Okay, so next up we have, here are your references, sorry. Next up we have Kenya. Kenya, would you like to take it away?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Sean. Right, so I will be covering designing for the end user with really a focus on the end user. I really like John's presentation and how it was specific to their particular project. But I will be focusing here more on the process itself. Next slide, please. Okay, so I will introduce Kijani and what we do. So Kijani is an organization that focuses on offering tailored field testing services and after-sales support for innovators or companies who are looking to launch a new product into the Kenyan market. So really, we usually see that there's quite a big gap between innovators having the vision of their product, understanding the problem that their product is supposed to solve, but when you go down to the ground, there's usually a bit some differences in how the problem might be understood or other problems that might crop up. So Kijani comes in to fill this a sort of gap where we work with like very early stage products. We introduce them to like a controlled couple of end users, really to understand if the product is indeed solving the problem that it is intended to solve. Next slide, please. Okay, so John has already covered the definition of the end user, and I particularly like how he did a comparison between the end user and the customer not necessarily being the same person. So here I'd like to add that while the customer might not be the end user, the customer usually, the customer creates the demand for the product, right? So they're the ones who, the end user will create the demand for the product and they will make the customers want to purchase the product. I'm already confusing the two. Right, so at Kijani, we go with the saying that the customer is always right. And this is a statement that makes us want to focus most of our testing efforts around field testing, because we really want to observe how the end user is interacting with the product. And then this drives us to what advice we give in the next steps. So my definition of the customer or the target market. So this is on a broader sense, not really the end user, but the customer, the target market is a group of people with some shared characteristics. In this case, for the innovators, it will be a perceived problem with which a product is supposed to solve. So I'll go back and explain in the next couple of slides why I used the terms perceived problem. But so the customer or the target market is either a person or group of people with some shared characteristics. So I'll give an example using John's presentation. The customer would have been, so either someone who be interested in purchasing the electric pressure cookers, either for resale or for using it in their own kitchen. So the challenge that they might have is maybe they're frustrated with traditional methods of cooking, or they have expensive current product when it comes to making food. Next slide, please. Right. So why focus on the end users? So innovators tend to focus on an idea for solving a particular problem. And they're the visionaries, they're very enthusiastic about the product, and sometimes they may develop some blind spots. So some of the issues that they might not be able to see is how they perceive the problem might vary, might not be the same way that the end user perceives the problem. And then the product that has been developed might solve the actual problem, but some other unforeseen problems might crop up. And then there might be other problems that the innovator has missed. And then the product might be brilliant, solving the particular problem. However, the market might just not be ready for that particular solution. Okay, sorry, I'm just reading the comments. These are the reasons why the innovator should focus on the end user while designing the product, as opposed to how they think they understand the problem that they are solving. Next slide, please. Okay, so here are some key questions that we usually focus on at Kijani. So is there a need for the product? Is there a gap that is an issue that this product is addressing? And then, as opposed to can the product be built, the question really is, should the product be built? Is the market ready? Because like I said, sometimes there really is a problem that is addressing a particular solution, but the market really is not ready. So I'll give an example, and I'm happy to take questions, because this is like on a high level, like how we were approaching it. But we had a sort of an IoT product for the agricultural space that was quite brilliant. It really just automated quite a number of things for small scale farmers. So the issue was that there was a lot of time wasted connecting off-takers, insurers to small scale farmers. And so there was an IoT solution for this that really solved the problem, because it would connect insurers to potential customers, and it would be able to connect small scale farmers to off-takers and vice versa. However, the biggest challenge was that it required small scale farmers to be very tech savvy, to be able to use a smartphone, to be able to download an application and follow all these complex instructions. So for this particular instance, it was just, the market was not there yet in terms of uptaking this particular solution. And then the last question is, can you build a sustainable business model around the product? And so the first two questions are linked, and the last two questions are linked. Next slide, please. Okay, so the process that we usually work with is quite iterative. It involves going through 5 steps over and over, depending on how new the product is, until we get to a point where we feel like, okay, the end user is now ready to take up this product. So the first step is usually to ideate, come up with ideas on what the product should be, what the perceived challenge really is. And then the next step is to come up with a prototype. So the basic, very rudimentary products. We encourage that not too much time should be spent on trying to make the products like the best version that it could be. We work with like the most basic type. And then we test it under controlled area, and then we take it out to the field and test it some more, with a main focus on what the potential end users feel about it. From this, we learn, we collect data, we analyze, and then we go back to the ideation stage based on this new data that we have, that will inform us on what we need to iterate. So this could be like, there's some parts that maybe are not really being useful. Maybe there's some parts that are leading to a lot of confusion that needs to be replaced or covered. And then we go back to test again, and then we go back to learning and go back to the ideation. So this could take a couple of cycles, but the idea here is not to waste too much time going through the 4 steps, but to just go through them like even in a span of like 3 months, and you learn so much. And by the end of the day, you get this product that is has sort of been designed with the end user from the word go, from like when it was a very basic product to when now it's ready for launching. It has like the end user in mind. I think that's it for my presentation. Last slide. Yeah, thank you very much. I'm happy to take any questions.
Sure. Thank you, Kenya. And we'll have a Q&A portion at the end, so don't worry. If anybody
Okay.
has any questions, you can pick them up with Kenya at the end, right after Ivy's presentation. But thank you very much, Kenya. I'm sure they'll have questions for you. Okay, next up we have Ivy. And Ivy, can I just pass it on to you?
Yes, thanks, Sean. Very interesting presentations from John and Kenya. I've actually already learned so much. So yeah, I'm happy to keep in step with what has already been started. So for this section, we're going to look into considering and evaluating your impact upon an end user. So this is almost like once you've already determined who the end user is, the product is already out in the market, and now end users have been using your product, what impact are you having on them, and how can you improve that? So yeah, that's the main goal for over the next few minutes. So next slide. So the first question to ask here is, why do we even measure impact in the first place? And we have like 3 main reasons. The first one is to understand whether or not you're having any effect on your end users. The second one is to figure out if the impact is net negative or net positive. And then finally, to understand your end user and give them a say in your social work. And to do this, to measure impact, there are usually 3 major approaches that most investors use to measure their impact. So the first one, next one, yeah. The first one is the output approach. So this is where key numbers are collected that are easy for enterprises to measure. So for example, how many people do you serve? Where do they live? Are they still using your product or service? So the pro of this approach is that it gives insight into the breadth of impact that a company or enterprise or that the company is having. But the con is that it doesn't tell you much about the depth of impact that is being experienced by end users. The second approach is the laundry list. So here is where enterprises will be asked to collect metrics that matter to their investor or donor. So for example, if the investor has a focus on gender, then they'll be asked to collect metrics around gender and report those back to their investor. So the pro here is that you'll have access to more impact related numbers. However, it can be a logistical nightmare, especially for enterprises that do not have the capacity to collect that data. So what happens is that there's either no data or very like low quality data that's returned. And then the last approach is the academic approach. So here is where you use research to understand impact, primarily using RCTs, which are the randomized controlled trials. So this is an excellent approach to use because you're able to collect high quality data with a comparison group that gives you a sense of the depth of your impact. However, they are very expensive and they also take years to complete. So it could take up to 5 years. So for a very new social enterprise that it requires that data to make changes, like waiting for 5 years may not be like the best approach to use. So this is where 60 decibels comes in. Next slide. So our main goal here, or our work, is designed to make impact measurement meet these 3 gaps. Next slide. So the 3 gaps are on depth. So giving an enterprise a sense of the depth and meaningfulness of their impact. And then the second gap is on quality. So providing high quality data and insights. And then the last one is ease. So making the entire process time and cost effective or efficient for social enterprises based on their needs for today. So our philosophy as 60 decibels is that we wanted to, next slide, change the way impact measurement works. So moving from top-down compliance to bottom-up accountability. And what does this mean? Not only collecting metrics that are important to the investors or donors, but creating a method of measurement that puts the end user or customer at the center of the entire process. And like John mentioned, in many cases, customer is different from end user. But when we do the interviews, we usually aim to speak to the end user. So customer here for our case is similar to end user. Yeah. So one of the most important things of moving from top-down compliance to bottom-up accountability is that it changes the focus of these measurements from proving impact. So how many people are you reaching? Are you reaching men or women? Like just proving things that are important to investors or donors, to improving impact. So how can we improve the experience and impact that the end users are able to experience as a result of your product or service? And that's the how to do this is what we're going to chat about over the next few minutes. So next slide. Next, yeah, thank you. So very quickly about 60 decibels impact measurement process. It's all about like quick, repeatable studies that rapidly collect quality impact data and put the end user or beneficiary voice at the center of the process. So our projects typically take like 12 weeks and we primarily do phone interviews. And like what this means for this particular session is I'm hoping to give some actionable next steps that will help you to be able to start thinking of like how to put together your own internal measurement process, which is important even during the design phase, as Kinya mentioned before. Yeah, so the 5 main steps. Next slide. All right, so the lean data process has 5 main steps. The first one is around defining your goals. So here, the aim is to identify what you want to learn. Why are you reaching out to your end users? Is there a hypothesis that you'd like to test? Or are you trying to understand the challenges that they're experiencing? So defining your goals is very important in designing how the rest of your process will look like. Yeah, and that's the first step. The second step is on designing your survey. So here, the main thing is selecting and developing the right questions for the goals that you laid out. The third step is around now collecting the data itself. And then once you've collected the data, analyzing the data, and finally sharing your results. Yeah, so next step. So we'll quickly look at the second step, which is survey design. So survey design encompasses 2 main things. So the first one is writing your questions. So in a case where the types of metrics that you want to collect data for those questions are not available, then you'll have to write your own questions. But if you're doing a very simple data collection process, then you can just do a quick search from established organizations that collect data and then replicate the questions that they typically use depending on your goals. But if you're writing questions, there are a good number of guidelines for what a good question is, and I won't go into the details of this because of time, but I'll share these details after the presentation. Yeah, so next slide. Yeah, just the number of good guidelines here around the questions not being leading, making sure that the flow of your survey is easy for the end user to go through. Yeah, next slide. So there are three main types of questions that we use to collect the data. So the first one is around the customer profile. So understanding who your customers are. So this includes things like gender, age, income profile. So that group of questions is the first type. And then the second type is around business insight. So what is the experience of your end users with the product or service? Why did they even want to purchase from your company or enterprise or buy into your idea in the first place? And then the last one is around impact. So how is your product or service affecting their lives? So this is the framework that guides all the questions that we use for a typical lean data survey. Next slide. And then here I've given like a quick 5 steps on developing now a survey tool. Set your intention, which ties to your goals, determining your distribution plan. So which method are you going to use to collect this data? Are you doing online surveys, in-person surveys? So your distribution plan will affect the type of questions that you can add into your survey tool. And then designing the actual questions, which we've talked about, and then ordering your questions, which is very important. So there's the survey flow. If there are any sensitive questions in the survey tool, have they been appropriately introduced? And if there are similar questions, have they been grouped together? So ordering the flow of your questions is one of the important things to consider. And then finally, you test the survey. So this was information around developing the survey. Next slide. Then we quickly go into now collecting the data itself. So you have your survey tool ready. Now you want to deploy those questions using a method that would be most appropriate for your sample. Next. And because it's around data, there are a few statistics things that would be helpful to like be aware of, but we won't go into this now. I'll share these after the presentation as well. But the key thing here, next, is ensuring that the data that you're collecting and reporting on is representative of the entire population. And there are a number of few things that we do to ensure that representation, one of them being having high response rates. And I'll share detailed notes on all of these. So next slide for now. Yeah, so and because it's data, like you can't run away from like some of these statistics. And I know it can be very daunting at times, like thinking of all the different metrics that you have to think about and put in place. But there are many tools out there that you can use to just make the process simpler. And that's what we will share. Next slide, please. And then there are also different types of data collection methodologies that you could use. So you need to determine whether you want to collect the data just once using like a one-off project, or you'd like to speak to your end users a number of times throughout the lifetime of them using your product or service. Or whether or not you want to use a comparison group. So a group that's used the product or service versus those who have not, and comparing the outcome between those two. So these are some of the things that you need to make decisions on as you structure your study. Next slide. Yeah, and now the very key steps to getting started on collecting data. Most important one, select your method. And this depends on the kind of relationship you have with your end users. So if all of them sign up using emails, you can do an online survey. If you have their phone numbers, you can deploy phone interviews. If it's easier to reach them in person, then you'd have to do in-person interviews. So selecting your method first, and then 2, it's important to inform the people that are being interviewed that that you're going to interview them. So priming helps to increase response rates, and then do a small pilot of your whole process. So select a few people to interview first before you deploy the rest of the data collection process, and then execute your survey. And throughout your data collection period, it's important to consistently check the quality of your data. So are there some interviewers who are maybe not understanding the questions? Does that mean you need to rephrase those questions to make them simpler to understand? Say you're deploying these questions using research assistants. Are they paraphrasing the data or feedback they're getting back from the interviewers? So you need to consistently check the quality of your data to make sure that at the end of the process, you have high quality data from which you can pull insights from. And then now to wrap up, you need to analyze your data once data collection is finished. And here as well, next slide. There are many tools in the market that you can deploy to do analysis, and I'll share detailed notes on this as well because of time. Some of these tools are free, some of them you have to pay a bit for, and there's like determining the type of tool to use will be dependent on like your budget, how much time and knowledge you have around analyzing data in the first place. So yeah, I'll share more details on this with the notes later. So also with analysis, it's important to have a list of your hypotheses. So like Kenya mentioned, sometimes the problems that is perceived by people who are inventing the product is different from those who are using the product. So do you have any of those hypotheses that you'd like to test? Would you like to segment your data by certain data points, say like profile, either gender or age? What is important to you to learn from that data? Also, do you want to apply any weighting? So say, for example, you sampled more men than women. It might be relevant to weight your data so that it's representative of your entire population. Also, you can pull together some external resources. So for example, within 60 decibels, we use the Poverty Probability Index by IPA to just help us understand the income profile of the end users. So once you have your analysis plan nailed out, then it's time to analyze your data. And after you analyze your data, it's about now sharing the insights that you're drawing from the data with relevant parties. Next slide, please. So choosing, for example, the types of charts that you will use to visualize the data is very important so that you're able to effectively communicate what that data is saying and what steps can be taken from that data. So because we're putting the end users at the center of this process of measuring impact, the most important thing is what can we do from this data to improve the impact that our end users are experiencing. Yeah, so I'll pause there, take any questions, and I'll share with you a good number of resources. Yeah. With what I've shared here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivy. And you all covered quite a lot of content. So thank you for that. I'm sure this is a very beneficial webinar for our students, but I bet it also leads to a lot of questions. So does anybody have any questions for any of our speakers so far? Also, I'd like to say at this point, thank you to all our speakers for coming on board today and sharing such great presentations. So yes, is there any questions? Feel free to unmute yourself or raise your hand with the raise hand function if you can find it. In the meantime, we can bring up our own questions as well. So I have a question for any of the speakers that would like to take it. When considering your end user, how important is it to be inclusive in your considerations of who you should target? And at what point is there a trade-off in reaching a broader market and targeting a specific one? And maybe John, you can pick this up because you talked a lot about this during we spoke on choosing your end user.
Yeah, thanks. So I'd like to pick up on something that Ivy included in her presentation, which is about the need to segment the market and be targeted in who you're aiming at. I think you very much can aim at everyone and try and include absolutely everyone, in particular conventionally disadvantaged groups, which is what we tried to do with the Global Leap usability testing. We tried to include people with disabilities in particular to try and understand whether there are different needs and which types of electric pressure cooker might meet those different needs. What we ended up doing in the end was realizing that we were trying to reach too far, and we really tried to rethink our testing and focus in on who we thought were actually going to be the key customers for this. We realized that actually understanding what is important to people with disabilities is really important in itself. But we had to answer the first question first, which is who's going to be the key end user of these products? And there are many more people without disabilities than people with disabilities. So we ended up focusing in on that big market segment of the typical users of women who are cooking with charcoal, kerosene, etc., living in Nairobi. And then we decided to design a separate piece of research afterwards. So it's kind of a roundabout answer to your question, but I would say a targeted approach, which really thinks carefully about what types of end users are you likely to have for your product, and then focuses in on that particular market segment would be better than going for everyone at once all the time. But let's hear from the speakers and hear what their opinion is as well.
Yes, Kenya or Ivy, would you like to feed into that at all? Thank you, John.
I completely agree with John. I think focusing, having more of a focus is much better than a broader one, because then I think also there's some, you might run into some issues with like, how do I say this? Like there's some differences. Okay, how do I say this? The more focused a group is, the more you understand your target market, the more the similarities are there, the more the easier it is for you to get like some trends, some insights. The broader it is, the slight deviations that might really like skew the data at the end of the day, which just might take more time for you with like the testing process.
Thank you, Kenya. And I think that's all great advice for your own designs, everyone who's here, because inclusion is a consideration you should make in your own design process, and whether you focus in or you go broad. So it sounds like you should really target the market you want to tackle. Yeah, an important consideration. Is there any other question from the audience in the meantime?
Hi, I have a question specifically. So have you guys completed any long-term testing when it comes to getting feedback from the end users, or do you have any plans to do that, to evaluate when it comes to maintenance and services, how often, how long the lifespan of the cooker is, and how how does repairs, or if that's a feasible service that's provided? Have you done that at all?
Would any of the speakers like to pick that one up? Ivy, would you like to pick that up?
Yeah, I missed the first bit of the question.
Oh, sorry, my question was actually directed at.
Do you mind? Yeah.
My question was directed at John specifically with the pressure cooker, the electrified pressure cooker, because that's a specific product. I just wondered whether there's any plans for long term.
Sure, yeah, no, it's a great question. And yes, we have done some longer term testing. This specific program that I was mentioning here was very much based around, okay, we want to evaluate different models against each other, but we have also done longer term testing of different types of appliances. We've done, for example, monitoring of households over a period of a year, understanding not just the initial adoption, so how do people start using a new device once they've just got it and they've got this shiny new device back home and everyone's excited about it, but how does that adoption change over time? And what we've seen in many cases is that adoption often drops off, especially for some types of users, where they may have used it a lot in the beginning, and then their interest drops off and old habits die hard, and people revert back to the original fuels that they were using. So it is really important to do that longer term testing as well. On your question about repair and maintenance, then yes, absolutely, that's another area of testing that's really just starting to open up for us, really trying to understand what breaks on an electric pressure cooker and what kind of networks need to be in place to support these devices, especially once they get out to more remote, more rural places, and trying to design delivery models where that kind of after sales service is built into it. So you have a contact point and that person is, or organization is supplied with the spare parts that they need in order to be able to keep those devices working for many, many years to come.
Are there any specific design customer feedback loops set in place? Because it must be quite hard to collect that data.
Yes, I can give one example. We have an organization that we partner with in Western Kenya called Bila Sasa. They work with local women's savings groups. So they have a leader in each group where they train on a catalog of products, which includes electric pressure cookers. That leader then demonstrates the products to the group members, and then the group decide between themselves which products they would like to acquire. And then the leader is responsible for getting hold of the stock and for providing the after sales service. So if something breaks, then the group member reports it to the leader, and the leader deals with the organization who is likely in a city nearby, who then links with the appliance distributor, who is then connected back to the original equipment manufacturer, who is likely in China. So there's a long chain of getting what may be a relatively tiny spare part out to the end user in a very remote area, which otherwise, without that spare part, the device essentially becomes useless.
Okay, thank you.
I'll put a link in the chat about that specific organization.
Great. And then I'll share that in the notes after. I think we might have one more question from Ovi Jacob.
Good afternoon. What's the energy consumption of the pods? That's my question. In terms of wattage, I don't know.
In terms of power consumption, an electric pressure cooker typically uses 1 kilowatt of power. And to cook most dishes, it's between 0.1 and 0.5 kilowatt hours of energy that is needed. That kind of data is also in the link that I put in earlier about in the buyer's guide to electric pressure cookers. You can see the 3 popular dishes: spinach, rice, and beans, and the energy consumption of each, as well as the power consumption of each model.
Great.
Good afternoon. Can you hear us?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, so we're reaching or we're connecting from the class. And we don't have any questions from here. It's clear and well understood. We just want to commend you for this session and to say that it was a good time getting great insights from all the speakers.
Okay. I couldn't quite hear you. There's quite a bit of echo there, but were you just thanking the speakers for coming here today? Was there a question? Oh, there you go. Yeah, we can hear you now.
We don't have a question from the class here. So we are saying we commend the speakers for the time and the insights we gained from them. It was quite straightforward and well understood. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. University of Port Harcourt, I believe. Okay, so I think that'll close out the session for us today. If you're watching this recording and you'd like to send any questions over, you can contact us at Efficiency for Access Design, Efficiency for Access DC at, sorry, Jackie, do you mind dropping in with the email? I've forgotten it now. It dropped off the top of my head. You might have it on here. No. Anyway, I'll be sending the stuff out from that email. You send it to that, send the questions to that email. I'll pick them up. Don't worry about that. As for, we have a short feedback survey that we'd like people to complete at the end of this session. The QR code is here, but I'll also share the link in the notes. And there's a newsletter sign up as well. Same QR code is here. Sorry, we're flashing them up quite quickly, but we're running out of time. And I want everyone to be able to get going. But thank you all to the speakers for coming today. I think it was a really rich session today. We covered quite a lot of ground in a really important topic, I think, especially at the start of the design process. So thank you for coming out today. It's been a real pleasure. And I'll share everything that was mentioned today right after this. Again, thank you. Eric, thank you everyone for coming.
Well, thanks for having us, and thanks to the other speakers too. I really enjoyed their presentations. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, this was very, very insightful.
Yeah, it was quite interesting.